Well, last October, President Biden traveled to Tel Aviv, where he delivered an emotional speech telling the people of Israel, quote, as long as the United States stand, and we will stand forever, we will not let you ever be alone, end quote. But since then, the Biden administration has hampered Israel at almost every turn, undermining Israel's ability to defeat Hamas and eliminate the threat of terror right next door. They've limited their military options while strangely appearing to appease the regime in Iran. Now, some are asking, is the Biden administration setting up Israel to suffer the same fate as Afghanistan? Joining me now to discuss this and more is Carolyn Glick. She's a senior contributing editor at the Jewish News Syndicate and host of the Carolyn Glick Show on Jewish News Syndicate. Carolyn, welcome to Washington Watch. Good to have you back.
Thanks so much for having me on your program, Tony. I appreciate it very much.
Well, you're sounding the alarm over this. You have a recent column, which I've read, and by the way, there's a link at tonyperkins.com, on the Biden administration's diplomatic efforts in the region, what they've been doing, and you asked this question: why is the United States continuing to hamper the ability of the Israeli Defense Forces in Gaza? Now, you make that statement based upon a number of facts that you present. Tell us about it.
Well, for the past 3 months, I've been documenting the various ways that the Biden administration has been hampering the IDF's operations, whether it's through their demand for humanitarian aid, which we now know that 60 to 70% of all of the food and medicines and fuel coming into Gaza at the U.S.'s demand go directly to Hamas. So it's not actually going to the people of Gaza. And the only way to make sure that they would get the relief that they require is for them to leave Gaza, just as Ukrainians leave Ukraine and Syrians left Syria, and everybody leaves war zones in order to seek refuge. So the Biden administration is barring the Palestinians from leaving Gaza to seek refuge. And as a result, they're forcing them to remain beholden to Hamas and blocking Israel from being able to win the war.
Let me stop. Let me stop you right there. I want to make sure everybody's heard what you said. The Biden administration is prohibiting refugees, those in Gaza who we're hearing all this international commotion about them being collateral. They're being impacted by Israel's fight against Hamas. But America has shut the door in keeping them from fleeing to safety?
Yes, they have. They've said that they absolutely under no circumstances will allow forced migration, but it's not forced migration. Did you know that Gazans are paying $10,000 bribes to the Egyptian military to let them leave? $10,000. And, the United States pays foreign governments to allow Ukrainians to resettle in their territory or Syrians and so on and so forth. And yet the Gazans have to pay massive bribes to Egyptian corrupt Egyptian soldiers and officers in order to flee. In Israel, we have almost 200,000 internal refugees from our northern communities with Lebanon and from our southern communities bordering Gaza because they can't be safe for the duration of the war. They've been living in hotels since October 7th. And the Gazans just keep moving from humanitarian safe zone that Israel sets up for them to one to another. And Hamas is now operating out of these humanitarian safe zones. So anywhere these people go, they're always human shield.
They're being used by Hamas as cover for their attacks on Israel.
Right, exactly.
Now, you also point out, and I know this to be a fact as well, because I've been in communications with some Palestinian Christians who are trying to get out, and they have a country who will receive them, but they can't get out. These individuals leaving Gaza have places to go, countries that will receive them, but you said the United States is blocking their exit.
Right. There are at least 10 countries have already expressed willingness to accept the Palestinians who want to leave Gaza. And the United States is saying absolutely not, under no circumstances, and then blaming Israel for the plight of these people and demanding that we resupply Gaza, even though they know full well in the administration that requires Israel to resupply Hamas, prolonging the war, prolonging the captivity of our hostages that are being held by Hamas, and of course, prolonging the humanitarian suffering of the
And,
uninvolved civilians in
and,
Gaza.
and increasing the likelihood that they will be harmed by Israel's attempts to eliminate the threat of Hamas.
Exactly. So those are just some of the things that the Americans are doing. They're also slow walking ammunition that Israel requires to fight the war successfully, not only in Gaza, but also vis-a-vis Hezbollah in Lebanon. And they're now they've been saying that they want to recognize a Palestinian state, which would be the single largest prize any terrorist organization ever received for carrying out a massacre. This is the largest slaughter of
Right.
Jews Holocaust, and the
And,
Americans are saying we want to give them a state.
and I want to play a clip in just a moment of Secretary Blinken actually making that statement. We've talked about this multiple times on the program because it's crazy. We've had essentially a two-state solution, if you want to call that, since 2007 when Hamas took over jurisdiction of Gaza. So that's what you would get. This would be the outcome. But I want to go to something else that you pointed out in your piece, and I want you to elaborate on this, that in the negotiations for the release of hostages, which the United States has been involved in, apparently doing some shuttle diplomacy, that in exchange, no, set the stage here, and correct me on anything I say that's wrong. Please correct me. But we have Israelis who, on October the 7th, we had this massacre. Some were taken back to Gaza. They're being held. Some have been released. But there's negotiations to try to get more released. And part of the exchange is to release terrorists, that Israel has to release terrorists. Correct?
So yeah, we're in a pathological tailspin right now with these negotiations that are being led by CIA Director William Burns, who, by the way, together with Jake Sullivan, who's the national security advisor, they were the ones who made the nuclear deal with Iran under the Obama administration that essentially pays Iran billions of dollars and gives them a glide path to a nuclear arsenal. So the same William Burns is now overseeing these hostage negotiations, and the hostage negotiations aren't give back the hostages, release the hostages, or return Gaza into a parking lot. No, what they're saying is, if you give back the hostages, we will free thousands of terrorist murderers, including the murderers and the rapists who carried out the massacre of October 7th. And they're talking right now about a scale of what for every hostage they release, they're holding 136, and at least somewhere around 95 of them are thought to still be alive, at least. So they're talking about letting out one hostage per day, and in exchange, Israel is supposed to release between 100 and 250 terrorists that it's holding in its prisons, and it's only supposed to be one hostage per day. It's supposed to go on for 40 days. And during those 40 days, so not all of the hostages are supposed to be released. And during those 40 days, Israel is not allowed to continue its war against Hamas. And in fact, not only that, we're supposed to end surveillance flights by drones so that the Hamas can rebuild their terrorist infrastructure, and Israel won't have eyes to see what they're doing. They can move the hostages. We won't have eyes to see what they're doing. So, and Burns himself has been reported by the Wall Street Journal and the Arab media promising Hamas that the United States will prevent Israel from reinstating its military operations against Hamas. So they're using this hostages for terrorists and ceasefire deal to try to force Israel to lose the war, not to win, and to let Hamas survive, which means to win this war, which, as Prime Minister Netanyahu said last night in a primetime news conference, will guarantee that the next massacre, which will be even greater in scale, I might add, is just a matter of time. So we cannot accept this outcome, and that's the outcome that the Biden administration is now trying to force upon us. And I would assume that it's against the will of the American people, which I know is very much behind us. But the Biden administration's goal right now is to force Israel to stop fighting this war, even at the cost of strategic defeat. And so we're in a very dangerous moment right now.
A couple of observations, Carolyn, on that would be, this would be rewarding terrorists. I mean,
Absolutely.
this will only incite more, baby. In fact, I would think this would be signaling to Iran that they have a green light to do whatever they want.
I agree with you 100%. This is the worst thing from a signaling perspective that the United States could possibly do. As Prime Minister Netanyahu said yesterday in his news conference, the entire Arab world and Iran are sitting in the balcony overlooking the stage that we're playing upon, and they want to see what Israel does. If we don't fight to victory, it's not just that we won't have normalized relations with Saudi Arabia. All of our peace agreements with the Egyptians, with the Jordanians, the Abraham Accords, all of them will fall by the wayside because the Arabs will be convinced that Israel is too weak to trust and that they're better off trying to cut a
Right.
deal with Iran. And as for the United States, if the United States is going to betray its allies to such a profound degree that they're demanding that Israel lose this war, then the United States will be finished as a superpower. And the war that's being waged against us and against U.S. military forces in the region are going to very quickly start attacking Americans at home. There's
That's
absolutely
right.
no doubt about that.
I agree. I agree. I'm thinking here in history where such a close alliance that has historically been between Israel and the United States going back to 1948, where an ally has ever treated their ally like this.
I don't know. I guess you could look, you said Afghanistan, and you can, I guess, look at South Vietnam as well.
But we didn't have that close alliance. I mean, we're like
No.
we're like this. We have been historically. I mean, America. I think our future is intertwined with Israel's, quite frankly, and I say that as an evangelical believer. I want to play a clip from you mentioned the Prime Minister, and he made this remarks last night. This was actually to his press briefing, I think, yesterday. Clip number 4.
Total victory over Hamas will not take years. It will take months. Victory is within reach. And when people talk about the day after, let's be clear about one thing. It's the day after all of Hamas is destroyed. Not half of Hamas, not three-quarters of Hamas, all of Hamas.
Now, Carolyn, I know there's been a lot of dynamics in the politics there in Israel, but it appears that Israelis have put divisions aside, and there's unity in what the Prime Minister is proposing and what he's saying has to be done.
It's not just that, Tony. You know, right now I'm in Washington spending the week on Capitol Hill, speaking to our friends on Capitol Hill. And if I were home in Israel this evening, I would be speaking at a rally that tens and tens of thousands of Israelis have gathered at right now as we speak in Jerusalem outside of the government headquarters. It's a rally that was organized by Israel Defense Force reservists who have been fighting in Gaza for the past 3 months and were recently released. And they're demanding, these are fathers, these are adult civilians who were drafted on October 7th in emergency orders, and they're demanding to be remobilized, excuse me, remobilized and sent back into battle so that we can win this war. Because, oh my God, something got in my throat. They realize that Prime Minister Netanyahu is right.
Right.
We are winning this war. We have destroyed the vast majority of Hamas's military power, and we mustn't leave in the middle of the battle. We have to win, and we see that the United States pressure that's being placed on Israel is being placed on Israel in order to prevent that from happening. I don't know when you've ever seen a people who has been so mobilized for war and for victory and understand the imperative of winning against Hamas, not in points, but in a knockout, the way that the United States beat Imperial Japan and Nazi Germany in 1945. We understand that unless we have a victory that is so profound that it can't be denied anywhere in the world, whether, you know, in the South Pole or the North Pole or points in between, and everybody understands that the Israelis won, then it's just a matter of time before we face another massacre, as Prime Minister Netanyahu said last night.
And your security is, again, tied to our security. Israel must prevail. And I know that we are going to do everything we can. I've had multiple conversations, even this week on the Hill, with members in the leadership, and we're going to continue to do that. Carolyn Glick, let me thank you for joining us. Always great to talk with you. Very insightful, very helpful. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, and God bless you and all of your audience for their support for Israel. We feel it and we appreciate it, and we know that we can take that to the bank regardless of who is in the White House at any given moment. Thank you.
Absolutely.